is Ambassador Gordon Sondland. He is the former U.S. ambassador to the EU. He was appointed by Donald J. Trump in 2018. And he wrote an incredible story about his journey. And it's called The Envoy, Mastering the Art of Diplomacy with Trump and the World. What a title. And I got to tell you, Ambassador, it was a great book. I was given this book by Ambassador Sondland at the Romney event in Park City, Utah, a few months back. I said, please come on the Open Book podcast. We sell books here. We recommend books. This is a great book on a number of different levels. There's a real human story about your life here and the situation that you got placed in as a result of the Ukrainian situation and the testimony that you had to provide. But I want to go right to the parts of the book that I loved, if you don't mind, and that is your family. Tell us about your family and your background. We'll get into the Trump stuff later, but I think it's such a beautiful story.
I grew up in Seattle. I was the first U.S. citizen in my family, born on American soil. And by the way, before I continue, thanks for having me on, Anthony. I appreciate it.
Oh no, it's my pleasure, and it's a fantastic book. We'll get into it in a sec. But I want to. So you're the first U.S. citizen.
My parents were both Holocaust survivors. They essentially came here with nothing. I have a sister from the same two parents that's 20 years older than me. So when I was one, she was getting married. It was almost like having two mothers. And I grew up in a very sort of lower middle class, small portion of a very wealthy neighborhood. And it really motivated me because everyone around me was rich. All the kids drove new cars when they turned 16. Their families went to Hawaii and Europe and elsewhere on vacation. And mine couldn't afford that. And it really motivated me and made me envious. And envy is an incredible driver.
Well, yes, but tell us how you got started. Okay, so you built a beautiful, amazingly successful business. You in the lodging, hospitality business, among other things that you did. So give us the transition. You come out of college.
Well,
what's your
I dropped
first
out
job?
of college. I did about a year and a half, 2 years in college. I was bored and I was restless and I wanted to make money. I was singularly focused on that. So I started in the commercial real estate business and I started selling small apartment buildings. I kind of sucked at it for about a year. And then I finally decided to shoot for the moon instead of, at the time, an small apartment building in Seattle was, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. I decided to sell a full city block in downtown Seattle for, at the time, was $15 million. And this was in 1979. So that was a lot of money. And I almost ran out of money while I was trying to do it. But lo and behold, after about 10 months, I closed the deal. I made a little over $250,000 again in 1979, which was my first commission. My bank account was almost at zero. So walking in and depositing that $250,000 check was sort of an uplifting experience.
All right, so now we're moving along. You got yourself involved in Republican Party politics. What attracted you to Donald Trump? And I'm going to tell people how you and I first met, which I think is an interesting part of the story. But what attracted you to Donald Trump?
Well, as I say in The Envoy, I didn't know Trump other than a sort of fateful meeting with him in 1988 at the a Republican convention in New Orleans when George H.W. Bush gave his famous Peggy Noonan penned 1,000 Points of Light speech. And as I say, I ran into him in the elevator lobby. He was a total dick. I was asking him about an issue he had confronted in his business that we were facing as well, that was very well publicized. I wasn't bothering him. No one was around. And he was very dismissive of me because he didn't know who I was. He'd never heard of me. I was young, et cetera, et cetera. The next day, I'm sitting in the bar with two other people whom he knew quite well. And he came over and he said, tell me more about the hotel thing. And he couldn't have been nicer. And when I reminded him of that in 2016, I said, you were a real dick, but then the next day you were nice. Why is that? He said, well, of course I was nice the second day because you were with very important people.
Right. Well, I mean, the transparency is weirdly refreshing. It's almost like so transparent that you almost have to right. Right. No, because he's the dick of dicks. And so that's
Exactly.
why it's so interesting. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. But we met, and I'm going to tell you where we met, see if you test your memory. I had the good fortune of sitting next to you at what was my first fundraiser. And so what I did was I traveled with Mr. Trump to New Mexico, and then we boarded his plane to LA, and we went to, was it Tom's house? I think it was Tom
Exactly.
Barrack's house. We went to Tom Barrack's house. There was a tent outside. We had Wolfgang Puck cooking the meal, and it was a fundraiser. It was our first real fundraiser that I had organized with Steven Mnuchin, who went on to become the Secretary of Treasury. And you and I sat next to each other, built a nice rapport with each other. And then I saw your name pop up in the transition. So I was on the executive transition team, and you had your hand raised, I believe. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more or less in the record, to be an ambassador. And so we were looking for different spots for you. And then, which I think is arguably one of the most prestigious ambassadorships in the world, because people thought so well of you, you ended up as the ambassador to the EU. But you had to go through a very tough vetting process because of the partisanship going on in Washington. So tell us a little bit about that, and tell us how you ended up in the job.
Well, I almost wound up, with no job. I mean, while I greatly appreciated your advocacy and that of Steven Mnuchin's, I committed, I should say, the unpardonable sin of dropping out of the campaign toward the end. And the reason I dropped out of the campaign, which I go through in the envoy, was that one of my key employees, who is Muslim, said he was very unhappy with President Trump's characterization during the Khizr Khan incident. And I said, listen, say no more. If you're uncomfortable.
Okay, so let's go over that for our view. Not to interrupt you, but the Khizr Khan incident, the family lost their son in the military.
Yeah, their family lost their son. And instead of being an empathetic person, President Trump was highly critical of the family and the father in particular. It really turned off a lot of the Muslim American community, as well as the greater American community. It was one of those milestones in the campaign, which, included the remarks coming down the escalator, the TMZ tape, and now this. And I was put in a very difficult position. So I said, listen, you're more important to me than a political campaign. I will step down. I had already raised some money for the campaign. I had done my part. So when Trump finally became the nominee and then became president of the United States, this employee came back to me and said, listen, we have to support the president of our party. This guy was also a Republican. And he said, I'll get over it. If you want to participate, go ahead. You won't have any issues with me. So at that point, the campaign was over. He had already won. And I decided the only way to re-engage in the campaign was to essentially attend the inauguration and reconnect with all the people that I, lost contact with in those last 3 months, which I did.
Yeah. And one of the best parts of this for me is, and I'll tell the story quickly, we were raising money for Mr. Trump. The establishment hated him. I mean, let's just be honest about it. None of the large scale donors that I was successful at raising money for Governor Romney in 2012 wanted to give Mr. Trump any money. And so we did an event at Cipriani's in Midtown at 42nd Street in June of 2016. So a few months before the election, and it was obviously a month before the nomination. And I think only Scaramucci's were there, Gordon. I think I had to get my mother there. I had to get my cousins. I was bringing them in from Long Island. We had to fill
but the venue was
Trump
almost
go
big
crazy
enough
on
to
us.
house all the Scaramucci's. So,
Yeah, exactly. It was almost big enough, but we had every Scaramucci that known to mankind in the room. And he was yapping away about his Twitter strategy and so forth. But we literally raised him no money. Mnuchin and I were sort of embarrassed. And then fast forward to December, I think you'll remember this, we had a fundraiser there for the transition
and for the
team.
inauguration itself.
And of course, for the inauguration, and the line was out the door. It was completely packed. And of course, Trump being Trump,
now you love
says,
me.
hey,
now,
where are you guys? Yeah, where are you guys
Now
last
you love
time?
it.
Yeah, he loved it.
Yeah.
Exactly, he loved it. Yeah, it was.
Well, I
Yeah, yeah. Look, I
decided
mean, look. I
at
mean,
that point the
I'm.
only way I would get back into good graces was to make an impact. So when this employee of mine came to me and said, "You can re-engage," I said, "How about this? Would you and your family like to join my family and me at the inauguration?" And he said, "Wow, that would be great. I've never been to a presidential inauguration." So I bought the big ticket, and the big ticket at the time was $1 million. And that got a lot of attention
Yeah.
because the wags and the press said, "Oh, you wrote $1 million check and got an ambassadorship," which tells me that the press really doesn't understand how the process works. Because there were
Yeah.
about
Well, of
60
course. So
people
that,
who
but
wrote
and
checks
so
for $1 million, and none of them got an ambassadorship. So
well, yeah, of course. So go into that. So you write the check, and of course, what's interesting is for some reason when Democrats are writing checks like that, the press is not writing about it and they don't care. But when the Republicans are doing it, they try to point it out. This is the reason why there's so much dishonesty in the media at this point, and why many Americans, I would say citizens globally, are really starting to distrust the media. I mean, we have the media out there right now propping up a fraud in the cryptocurrency markets. It's
well,
very
we
hard to
can get
understand
into
that.
this, a little
But
later, but one of the things I advocate for, Anthony,
yeah.
very strongly, which is completely counterintuitive to what you hear in the media, is for more political appointees representing the United States, not less.
Yes, I want to, and I think it's the right thing to do because you need alternative thought. You need to get out of the artifice of Washington and the State Department, and you need
Exactly.
fresh eyes on problems, and you need experienced business people like you that really love the country, are a product of the country, have lived the American dream, want to further the goals of the country. You write so beautifully about all this stuff. Before I go into that, though, I'd like you to share your views of Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney. Both of those people I consider personal friends. I know them both very well, worked for both of their presidential campaigns. Um, you write about them. Why do you think they were both underrated by the Republican Party and the Republican Party voters?
Well, I think the Republican Party was really looking for a complete upstart. Um, Both Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush, both of whom I care for a great deal, they're both good friends. In fact, full disclosure, I'm an investor with Jeb in some of his private equity investments. They're great guys, but they definitely drive in the middle of the lane. They don't veer outside the lines. They're very decent people. And I think the frustration with the Obama years in the Republican Party, particularly in the more conservative wing of our party, was so great. They wanted a flamethrower. They wanted someone to put a turd in the punch bowl, however you want to describe it. And they did not think that either Jeb or Mitt, in his case, would be that man. In the case of Donald, there's no question.
All right. Well, we agree with that. So it's interesting. We're in an age now where experience, policy wonkishness, intellectual curiosity to do the job is perhaps less interesting to the voter. What's more interesting to the voter is express the anger that they're feeling. They feel disassociated with the American dream. Many people feel disaffected from the establishment, and so Mr. Trump, I think we would both agree, represented that, and he represented that in a very strong and powerful way, upsetting at times to people like your employee. But by and large, that's why he was able to galvanize the Republican
It
Party. Is that
is.
fair to
And,
say?
in fairness, you worked for a short time for him in this job in the White House. I worked a little longer. To give him some credit, he was very restless about getting things done. And he was one of these people who checked his watch, not his calendar. I remember clearly many times when in the morning he would want something done and he wondered why 3 o'clock in the afternoon it wasn't already underway. When some presidents wouldn't even turn to that issue for months, if not years, he was at it relentlessly. And frankly, that's how I think we got the FDA to approve those vaccines so quickly, was because he would not take no for an answer. He was relentless. And I think that's what the American people saw in him when they voted to elect him president.
Yeah, I mean it's unfortunate because the Operation Warp Speed, which you're referring to, he does deserve credit for that. Of course, now Vice President Kamala Harris said she would never take the Trump vaccine
Until
under no
she did.
circumstances, and then and then it didn't become the Trump vaccine, and so there's a little bit of this nonsense that goes on with the partisanship of even our scientific establishment. We got a lot of people in our country that don't believe in these vaccines. Some people think that they're making them sick and all this stuff. So there's wild amounts of disinformation out there. But let's go to you, because I think you had one of the more interesting jobs. You write about this in the book. You had you're the ambassador to the EU. You're in Brussels, but you're also the ambassador to NATO is there. The ambassador to Belgium is there. You have 3 U.S. ambassadors in one European city. So describe it to us. Describe what your life was like, how you interacted with those ambassadors, how you interacted with NATO, the EU, country of Belgium.
Well, it was a very touchy ambassadorship, as you point out, in that in some cases, those 3 ambassadors, it would be hard to find a room big enough to contain the 3 egos that each ambassador had, and who's the alpha in the relationship. In my case, I was very fortunate. My colleagues included Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who is the ambassador to NATO, and my friend Ron Gidwitz, who was the ambassador to Belgium. And we really did a great job of dancing together. We each stayed in our lane when it came to our respective missions, but we operated the city as a tri-mission, and we used each other's resources and assets to accomplish the tasks we needed to accomplish. So I spent a lot of time at NATO. Yeah. I spent a lot of time literally across.
I love that. I love the collaborate. And this is another reason why I'm in your camp, that more business people, entrepreneurs, they need to get involved with the process, because you can help lubricate the diplomatic system, if you will. And you also realize that it's a collaboration. It doesn't have to be an ego bashing festival. Do you feel like you succeeded in your role, Gordon?
In fact, when the whistleblower complaint surfaced and everything got sidelined, not just in my role, but in the entire administration, focusing on that first impeachment, we were on the cusp of closing so many deals. We had already closed a few, and we were on the cusp of closing so many, which literally got washed down the river as Congress started to focus on the impeachment. And I really couldn't be effective in my job after that. It was very difficult.
Right. Well, you're a man. You did a great job. You testified honestly. And when you felt like you couldn't do the job because of all the different circumstances, you bowed out gracefully. Unfortunately, that happens in politics. I got fired after 11 days. I said something really stupid, which was regrettable. But I owned it. I mean, and I didn't blame anybody else but myself. I accepted the firing. And I think because you've seen me with General Kelly. We're very close friends today. No harm, no foul. That's the nature of politics. I think you're a total gentleman. You come across as a total gentleman in the book, which I admire. I want to talk about President Zelensky for a second, because you had the opportunity to build a relationship with him, and you hosted him in 2019. Tell us your opinion of President Zelensky. Tell us why you were hoping for closer U.S.-Ukraine cooperation, and maybe you can give us some of your insight into the current debacle that's taking place between the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Well, President Zelensky was, an unconventional candidate and successful candidate. He was very much like a Ronald Reagan, where people criticized his show business background. What business does this guy have running Ukraine? He's an actor. And I think we've seen with 2020 hindsight that not only is the guy smart and tough, but he's a baller. I mean, he really is. Most people in his position would have had a Swiss bank account and would have been on a global express hightailing out of Ukraine the minute the bullets started flying. And he's there in a flak jacket while missiles are flying over his head. There's no question the Russians wanted to take.
Are you surprised by that?
Well,
some of the people in the conventional press were, but after you meeting him and getting to know him, were you surprised by that?
It's a difficult question, because when we met him, we knew right away that he and President Trump, would get along really well. And we were just trying to get the two of them together in the same room to shoot the shit. Nothing more. No asks, no gives. Just get to know one another, because we thought once Trump met Zelensky, good things would happen for Ukraine. And of course, Giuliani pokes his nose in the middle of this and ruined that entire strategy. And both Secretary Perry and Ambassador Volker were frustrated by that. But no, to get back to Zelensky, we thought he was smart. We thought he was tough. But until the bullets started flying, no one even knew what kind of toughness the guy had.
What do you think happens? We've got a war that's gone on almost 10 months now. It's dragging on. We're going into the winter. You know the area well. You know the geography. You've read our intelligence briefings.
I think unfortunately, it's totally up to us as to what happens. It's not up to Europe. It's not up to Japan. It's not up to Australia. It's up to us. We can put our foot further down on the gas and end this war quickly, or we can continue to pretend that we don't want it escalated, that the Russians are giving us some sort of deference because we haven't gone further in terms of both the armaments we're supplying, the intelligence we're supplying, clearing the airspace in Ukraine, all of the different things that we would do if it were our fight rather than the Ukrainians' fight. And I do think because it's the doorstep to Europe, I think we have to put our foot down on the gas and finish this war quickly. I think any negotiations prior to a decisive military victory would be an enormous mistake.
Okay, and so you believe that the Ukrainians can beat
only with our help.
The Russians.
Only with our help.
Right. But we are helping them. So
we're helping them judiciously and tentatively. And we're trying to walk this tightrope, which I think created this sort of face-saving pretext for the Russians.
Right.
I think the Russian economy is in shambles. I think that Putin is on the ropes. I think if there is ever a time to finish this, it's now.
Okay, so how would you finish it? Give me the policy prescription to finish it.
I think the way I would finish it, and you can have multiple military experts on your show that can give you chapter and verse better than I. But the lethality of the weapons that we provide the Ukrainians, the intelligence we provide them, and the fact that we need to own the airspace over Ukraine, which may in fact cause us to have to get into a direct shooting war with Russian MiGs, I don't think we have a choice. I think if this drags out, you're going to wind up in a sloppily negotiated settlement, which will reward the Russians for their behavior and only strengthen Putin's hand inside of Russia. I think Putin needs to be punched hard in the nose, and I think our allies need to be brought along with us, even if it means leveraging some of our trade levers that we have to insist that they join us in this effort. We don't have a choice. Putin started it. We have to end it.
All right, so I think it's well said, and I appreciate it. I want to go back to the impeachment hearings. Most of the Americans that are watching this podcast, maybe even some of the Europeans that watch my podcast, will remember you from your thoughtful testimony. You agreed to cooperate, but you also had some opinions related to the quote unquote Trump famous conversation. Tell us about that. Tell us why you agreed to cooperate. Tell us, your thoughts about your testimony. Give us a sense for what you wrote.
Well, just a little correction, Anthony. I didn't really agree to cooperate. They asked me to come voluntarily to testify. I, of course, turned to my employer, who was the State Department at the time, and said, "What do you want me to do? I work for you." They said, "Don't go." So we turned back to the committee and said, "We're not coming." And they immediately followed the polite request up with a subpoena. At that point, we thought the White House was going to run cover and say, "We're not letting you go until the Supreme Court tells you have to go. So stand down." And they wouldn't do anything of the kind. They basically said, "You're on your own." So I had no choice. My attorneys told me I had to honor the subpoena. Otherwise, I would be liable for being in contempt of Congress. I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to spend the money to fight it on my own. So I came and testified because I was compelled. I was probably, Anthony, the only witness that didn't have an agenda there. A lot of those witnesses really wanted to take the opportunity to undermine the administration because they were disgruntled. I just wanted to get back to Brussels and go back to work. I wasn't there to hurt Trump. I wasn't there to help Trump. I just wanted to tell what I knew under oath, the truth as I could best recall it, and then move on. And the others that testified before and after me clearly didn't have that agenda at all.
Why did you think that the conversation wasn't that big of a deal, or let's describe it as a red herring?
Because I didn't think it was an impeachable offense.
Yeah. And again, just for viewers and listeners, this is the conversation between Trump and Zelensky that the whistleblower called.
When you parse the words and listen and read the transcript of the call, which again, with 2020 hindsight, I didn't see that until the hearings had already begun, because no one produced that readout and no one told any of us, including Ambassador Volker and Secretary Perry, what had actually gone on the call. It would have informed a lot of other things that we said and did afterwards had we seen what President Trump was trying to express to President Zelensky. But when I read the transcript, there was nothing there that I thought was impeachable. Did I think it was properly phrased? Did I think he should have used that conversation to try and get his, the leader of another country to investigate potentially a political opponent? No, there are other ways to do that a little more deftly, and all presidents have done it to one degree or another. Obama's done it, Biden has done it, everyone's done it. I thought it was a little too blatant. And frankly, once it was exposed to the public, Anthony, I thought the proper place to handle all of that was the ballot box. You don't like what he said, don't vote for him again. But an impeachment was ridiculous.
I mean, listen, you make a good case. Again, I dislike President Trump. Him and I have gotten into a row. There was no reason for him to go after my wife on Twitter. Obviously, there's something psychologically damaged about the guy, in my opinion. And I appreciate your point of view. And I didn't totally understand the first impeachment either, so we can debate whether it was the right thing to do or not. But I do appreciate your point of view, and that's why I wanted to bring you on my podcast. I want to switch a little bit to talk about Rudolph Giuliani, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. I had the political reporter Andrew Kurtzman on, who just wrote a biography of Rudy this year. And he said in the biography, which I thought was interesting, he said Rudy created the template for the Trump presidency in terms of some of the bombast and some of the drama and the closeness of the two of them. They sort of like worked off of each other and feeded off of each other. I want to get your opinion on that. Do you think that that's true? You write in the book, obviously, you believe that Mr. Giuliani, Mayor Giuliani, hurt the process. So tell us your thoughts on
I think that biographer had it backwards. I think, Trump created the template for the Rudy Giuliani post-mayoral life, not the other way around. I think Trump. Well,
tell us why.
Used Rudy Giuliani as sort of a fungible tool. Volker, Perry, and I come back from Kiev. We're all excited. We had spent, a day and a half with Zelensky. We said, Trump's got to meet this guy. He'll really like him. And we go into the Oval Office and we sit down all excited, and Trump wants to hear none of it. He goes, I don't want to talk about Ukraine. I got other things to deal with. You want to deal with Ukraine? Talk to Rudy. And we're looking at each other, and one of us, it might have been me, it might have been Perry, said, Rudy, what the hell does Rudy have to do with Ukraine? And he said, well, Rudy's been involved. He's spent a lot of time there. He knows what's going on. I trust Rudy. You talk to Rudy. And, he said, wait a minute. He's not with the State Department. He's not with the U.S. government. We're trying to get you and a foreign leader together. What the hell does Rudy Giuliani have to do with all of that? And Rudy Giuliani was basically, at the time, sort of Trump's dustbin. If he didn't want to deal with something, rather than throw it in the garbage, he would give it to Rudy to deal with. And then once Rudy was off and running, you never know whether Rudy was making the policy or Trump was making the policy. And so a lot of what Rudy said to the members of my team, to Volker and to Perry, we never really knew whether those things were coming from Rudy or whether they were coming from Trump.
All right. Well, I mean, and that's another thing about Mr. Trump, the president. He was an outsider. He liked Rudy's outsiderness. He had a distrust for establishment players and people in the State Department. It was Reince Priebus. I was in the meetings. Rudy put his hand up to be the Secretary of State, and Trump was very interested in making him the Secretary of State, which would have been a colossal disaster. And so I know that there were players that were undermining that for Rudy. They do it I could never figure this out. All Reince Priebus had to do was go to Rudy and Trump and say, hey, you'd be a disaster and we can't do that. But he would act like he was Richie Cunningham and then he would stab him in the back in the New York Times. It was like sort of nonsensical stuff. That's probably why we don't hear much about Reince Priebus anymore, because of the way he disgraced himself. But let's go to Trump behind closed doors. You write about that. He's a complicated person. And we both know he's an attention seeker. What was your relationship with him behind closed doors as an ambassador?
It's an interesting question. And the only way I can really gauge my relationship with him was to watch him interact with others. And I'm not talking about necessarily people that are low-level staff in the White House. He was actually quite, friendly to them and seemed to be a fairly congenial boss. What I'm talking about are people who have 4 stars on their shoulders, who've spent a lifetime in military service. I'm talking about senior members of Senate leadership. I'm talking about other ambassadors like me. And it was interesting. You kind of put people in 2 categories. They were either supplicants or they tried to treat him as a peer. I was in the latter category. He was the president of the United States. I was an ambassador. I owed him, first of all, I owed him my job, number one. And number 2, I owed him the deference that the office, calls for. He is the president after all. But I really didn't need the job. And I told him early on, don't tweet about me. If you don't like what I'm doing, just have someone call me and tell me you don't like what I'm doing and I'll go home. I mean, I don't need the drama. And he said, no, I would never do that. I'm so grateful that you're willing to serve and take time from your business. And, told me everything I wanted to hear. And we sort of had that relationship. And I wasn't bashful about telling him when I thought he was wrong. And again, I would always be deferential in the fact that, hey, this is your call. You're running the show. If you want to do that, go ahead. But here's what's going to happen. And I'm just telling you, if you don't want to hear it, sorry.
Right. So do you think that worked? Do you think he ultimately got incensed by that? Or do you think he respected
I think he respected it in me and in others who treated him similarly. I think what created my firing was that once the hearing was over, he put me in the same category as a lot of the other witnesses who I just said previously had an agenda to undermine him. I wasn't trying to do that. But he also knew that if I was going to go around Europe, I got a lot of media in Europe. If I was going to be giving speeches, the number one thing that would be on every reporter's mind would have been the impeachment, and the thing would never go away. So he wanted me gone in order to make the story go away because the story was attached to me. They tried to get me to resign. Yeah. I said, I'm not resigning. I didn't do anything wrong. In fact, I had been receiving laudatory emails from Secretary Pompeo and others about what a great job I had been doing. So I said, if you want me gone, you're going to have to fire me. I'm not resigning. And that's what happened.
Right. All right. Good for you. Well, you're one of a legion of people, including myself, that were fired by the Trump administration. So perhaps that's a medal of honor for you to wear. Yeah, exactly. Listen, you're a very straight shooter guy. I mean, the book is great. You talk very candidly about your life. You talk very candidly about the ups and downs of the Trump administration, the trials and tribulations of being an ambassador. You also, despite the complexity of Donald Trump, you supported him even after you got fired. By the way, for 2 years after I got fired, I did support President Trump. It's when I said something that he didn't like on the Bill Maher show, and somehow it ricocheted off of my wife, which I will never, ever be able to understand. That's just something off about the man's personality. But you said that January 6th was the last straw for you. So tell us.
The way I explain it simply is I put the Trump presidency in 2 buckets. Bucket 1 started at the escalator in Trump Tower and went all the way to January 6th. It included Ukraine. It included the pussy tapes. It included Khizr Khan. Anything you want to mention that people had issue with, to me, I thought all of those were ballot box issues. Okay? You don't like it, don't vote for the guy the next time. Once we got to January 6th, I thought that was a game changer, because the one thing that I point out in the envoy is whether it's an autocracy that wants to be a democracy or whether it's a nascent democracy that's trying to become a real democracy, They look to us for the way we turn the keys over in the United States. Nobody turns the keys over from one leader to another like we do. Partly it's ceremony, partly it's legal, but we do it better than anyone. And Trump really fucked that up. And as a result, I can't forgive that. And that to me was an impeachable offense.
And, obviously I had already swore off him months prior to that. But let me push back for a second. Let me be his advocate here. But the election was a fraud. And so he was cheated out of the election, and that these election machines were mistabulating the votes. And clearly he's a way more popular guy than Sleepy Joe Biden. So he won the election. And this is the reason why he reacted that way.
Well,
what do you say to that?
The first is, was there fraud in the election? Absolutely.
Let me just stop and let you know I don't fucking believe any of that, but I just
I
had to
hear
test
what
you
you're
on this. So go ahead.
The question is, was there fraud in the election? Were there abnormalities? Were there bad machines? Of course there were. But the real question is, did it make a difference in the outcome? And the answer is no. The second thing is, these issues on a state and local level were heard by numerous judges. And surprisingly, a lot of the judges that heard a lot of these issues dealing with the minutia that you just described were Trump appointees. Now, don't you think, everything being equal, if a Trump appointee, all things being equal, could rule in favor of the person who gave them their judgeship, would probably want to do so if they could legally justify it? Of course they would. Most of them were grateful. But unanimously, he got ruling after ruling after ruling around the country, including from Trump appointees and Bush appointees, that no, there was a big nothing burger there when it came to changing the outcome of the election.
See, it's a very mature way to look at it because, having been around politics a long period of time, there's no system of vote tabulation that's perfect. And so I think we both agree on that. But what you're looking for is the totality test, and he lost the totality of that election. It was very, very clear and very convincing.
Now, with 2020 hindsight, looking at what Biden has done to our country,
right.
I wished he hadn't lost, but he did.
Right. All right. Well, we would probably disagree with that. I don't like President Biden's policies, but the January 6th thing is a tell that Mr. Trump is not in love with the democracy. He's not in love with the system that we have in place.
He had not lost prior to January 6th.
No, I understand that, but he's a threat. He's a threat to the American democracy. So for me, I'm a Republican ambassador. I would like to see a Ron DeSantis, a Mike Pompeo, a Nikki Haley, somebody different from President Biden. But I voted for President Biden because I saw the risk that Mr. Trump was to the American democracy. Prior to January 6th, if you asked me, is Mr. Trump a threat to the American democracy? I would have said yes. And I'm glad he didn't win because I do think he represents that threat. Those other people, Nikki Haley, men and women, Mike Pompeo, Ron DeSantis, I don't think they represent that. And I just think they're better messengers for the Republican Party and for the movement of those values and ideas.
What I think we have to do is we have to convince some of the more diehard supporters of President Trump that the policies are what they should be focused on. And three of the candidates, of the ostensible candidates, Pompeo, Haley, and Pence, basically moved those policies forward. So I think, as you say, there are better people to take the Trump policies in 2024 and move them forward. Here's another thing I think we're missing. In 2024, if Trump were fortunate to actually be elected president again, I'm really afraid that he would not be able to govern for 4 years and that those policies would languish and suffer as a result because he would be so tied up in investigations,
there's too much hate.
And so
I agree with you,
what we want is we want to turn the country back around. We need someone who can execute. I don't think Trump can execute at this point.
I only got a few more questions left for you, Ambassador. You're such a great guest. But at the end of your book, you say China, Russia, and Iran present the biggest threats to global peace and prosperity in that order. It's literally, I took it right out of your book. What does the U.S. and the EU need to do to limit these threats?
What we need to do, first of all, is to identify things vis-a-vis China that we have no daylight between us. Because the one thing that scares the shit out of China is when they see the US and the EU acting in concert without any daylight on an issue. Because they know together we're unstoppable from an economic standpoint, from a military standpoint, and frankly, from a political standpoint. And they love to exploit daylight. We can't have daylight. Huawei was a classic example of that, where the Trump administration was trying to kill Huawei expansion, but the Europeans loved the price, they loved the deal, and their economics were taking priority over their long-term strategy. We have to focus on that with the EU. And that's why I think the ambassador, whoever the new ambassador is going to be under the next administration, really needs to be plugged into the top 4 or 5 people at the White House in order to move that agenda forward.
We just talked about Donald Trump. I think we're both in general agreement that I'll say it, you agree or disagree, we wouldn't support him to be the nominee in 2024 for the
Republican Party. I agree.
Yes,
I would not support
him. Fair to say? Yes. Oh, okay. Okay. So what are your hopes and predictions then for 2024 for the Republicans?
I think we have an outstanding field of people. If you go to the ones that have already made their, desires known, whether they're formal candidates or clearly signaling that, DeSantis, Youngkin, Haley, Pence, Pompeo, Tim Scott, there's some outstanding people out there, and all of whom I think would return the country back to a more conservative, small government, lower taxes, strong military, border security. You can go down the list. Any one of those candidates would be great. I haven't yet made a decision personally. I'm getting to know each candidate that I don't happen to know well now. And over the next few months, I plan to get behind someone. But I'm really pleased with our field. I think the Democrats have a real deficit in terms of a field like we do.
And obviously I agree with you. But so you are not dissuaded. You were fired by President Trump. You had to withstand the heat of that congressional testimony. But you're still locked in the cockpit for Republican Party fundraising.
With the right candidate, absolutely. No question about it. And I do this job, and I would do the job I had in a heartbeat, if I were asked again, because now my subject matter knowledge and my learning curve, I could hit the ground running, as could many of my colleagues in their respective jobs.
Yeah. Well, listen, you are terrific. And I love your straightforwardness. You grew up in Seattle, but you could be a New Yorker. Okay, you have a much better accent than me. But Ambassador, I love your straightforwardness. I admire you a great deal. The title of the book is "The Envoy: Mastering the Art of Diplomacy with Trump and the World." It is an excellent read. It's a fresh writing style that you have. It's concise. I learned a lot from the book, and I'm looking forward to helping you promote it. And thank you very much for joining us on Open Book with Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate it.
As we climb up the social and the economic ladder, our brains find other things to want and make us unhappy when we realize that they're there and we don't have them. So 115 today, depending upon where you live, you could live like a king and you could be the richest person in the area, or you could be the poorest person. And unless you are highly, highly aware of that and remind yourself that shouldn't be determining your happiness, you're going to let that determine where you fall on that level of reasonable happiness.
So welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. I am very proud to have on with me a comedian, author, podcaster, Paul Ollinger. He's written a phenomenal book, actually. It's got to figure out a way to raise the profile of this book. I think this book is interesting. It's comedy. It's philosophy. It's almost a how-to on life in here, Paul. I don't know. I love the book. Reasonably Happy by Paul Ollinger. And the point being, you're living on Earth, so some things are going to go badly for you. You have to learn how to deal with it, but you're reasonably happy. Am I right? Are you reasonably happy?
I'm very reasonably happy. But, one of the main contributors to reasonable happiness is appropriate expectations. And if you think that everything's going to go great every single day in every facet of your life, you're going to be a highly dissatisfied human being.
Right. No question. But some of us have that problem. I don't, by the way. I started out getting my ass kicked. I've continued to get my ass kicked. My expectations
in
for
far
life
better
actually,
circumstances, Anthony. Though,
yes, but my relationship with life is one where I have expected the worst. I have zero expectations. So anything that happens to me, I'm grateful for. I'm also, Paul, unlike you, you're a tall son of a bitch. I am too short. So I am too short to see the glass anything other than half full. When I'm looking up at the glass, it looks full to me. But of course, we met at a comedy club late last year, which was a lot of fun, wasn't it? I thought that was fun.
It was a lot of fun. I didn't have my best set ever, but that's the way it goes. Some days are great, some crowds are into it. They wasn't a bomb. It just wasn't great.
All right. Well, I mean, look, who the hell is? I mean, tell me. Listen, I had an 11-day experience in the White House. Wasn't my best set ever. Okay. I mean, you have to just deal with it, right?
That's right.
But I thought you were great. I didn't think you were. I have to confess, I left halfway through your set because I was on a time schedule, and I told these guys that I had another meeting that I told Seth I had to leave. I will say this, and if Seth was here listening, of course, this is a mutual friend of ours.
Yep.
Who's also a comedian. If you're starting out with a rendition about the death of your mom and you're showing slides of your wonderful, warm, beautiful, but very deceased mom.
Yep.
And then you're like, okay, let's shut off that emotion. And now we're going to go to stand-up comedy.
That's right.
So Paul Ollinger, you may have had a bad set, but you may have been in a bad environment for a set.
Well, I did an Alzheimer's benefit one time, and to start off the show, they had the people from the Alzheimer's Foundation, and it was like Alzheimer's, is an incurable disease that robs, millions of families of their loved ones. There's no cure. It's going to take tens of millions of dollars, blah, blah, blah. And now comedy, and it's one of those things where you go, okay, well, let's step up. Let's recognize the energy in the room and do your best. But every comic that's been doing it for more than a little while has the stories of the setup that just doesn't put you in a position to win necessarily, but that's what you got to deal with,
Yes, I agree with you. But Paul, who can't love this title? Reasonably happy. And so tell us where that came from. Where did you get this great personality from? And how do you define reasonably happy?
Well, where my personality comes from is probably I grew up one of 6 kids in a big, loud Catholic family. We had everything we needed, but, it wasn't the most luxurious of upbringings. It was relatively Spartan. And I think that I had all the love I needed, but I always wanted more. And the crazy thing is that all that ambition that was lit in me at a very young age is also the flip side of that is also the thing that keeps us unsatisfied in life. And so the people and the more hungry you are over time, when you go to high school, you go to college, you go to graduate school, you get put in environments with other ambitious people. And then your standards just keep going up and up and up. When you got to Goldman Sachs, you probably saw levels of wealth you never even imagined growing up, but then all of a sudden that becomes normal. And so you become dissatisfied. Well, that's just the way our brains have evolved. And so when I write about Reasonably Happy, when I do produce my podcast called Reasonably Happy, it's almost therapy for me, a reminder to say, hey, you're okay. Just keep doing what you're doing. Don't expect too much and be very, very grateful for all the great stuff that you have.
Hard for some people to do, Paul.
Hard for everybody to do.
Why so hard?
Because that's the way our brains evolved. The good news is that our ancestors were the survivors. They're the ones that avoided the saber-toothed tigers and staved off the tribes next door to sustain life and pass on their genes. The bad news is they were the most paranoid, unhappy sons of bitches that ever lived in the history of humanity.
Right, and they needed to be that way to survive, right?
That's right. And so we've evolved this tendency called negative filtering, where everything we perceive a lot of things in our environment as threats because our brains are designed to keep us alive, not to make us happy.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I've spent over half my life on Wall Street, so I know how important it is to talk in numbers. Let's face it, traditional therapy can add up fast. It can feel like a big investment, but it's also one of the most important ones you'll ever make. For me, therapy has been a game changer. Having someone to talk to, work through challenges with, and gain perspective from, it's invaluable. With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions. helping you save on both cost and time. Two things we all wish we had more of. Like most of us, I live a busy lifestyle, but with BetterHelp, you can join a session with just a click anytime, anywhere. No commute, no waiting room, just professional support when you need it. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/openbook today to get 10% off your first month. Okay, but we're now in a society of reasonable influence. We're now in a society of reasonable affluence. There's a lot of different things that can make us happy. I'm going to ask you a question because it's directly related to your book. If you had $115,000 a year in 1925, you were one of the richest people on the planet. It was an exceptional amount of money. That would put you into the multimillionaire status. And I could tell you right now, you have $115,000 a year, 1925, or 100 years later, I'm going to give you $115,000 a year. And remember now, you're going to live in 1925, though. So you're going to live with the tech, the medicine. You're going to live with the technology, the access to information,
No
the
air
lack of
conditioning.
internet, no air conditioning, streaming. You'll get ice blocks delivered to the house, and you'll have rudimentary phone system, rudimentary electrical wiring in the house, lots of fuse boxes everywhere. The smell of diesel, if you have a garage, you're going to have one of those wind-up cars. Okay, so now, and you have the wherewithal, knowledge, medical community of 1925 at your disposal with your very lucrative 115, or you could live with $115,000 today in 2025. And I think you know the point I'm getting from your book. So what is the answer?
Well, we're the most fortunate, wealthiest people that have ever lived in history. People who make $115,000 today live better than kings did 200 years ago. I think that's the point you're trying to make.
Yeah, I'm making the point that there is a social good that's worth all of that lack of money that you're having in 2025, that we're all richer. There's no Caesar from the ancient period of Rome that has flown in the back of the plane from New York to Miami. There's no Caesar that's done that. And
if he did, he'd be complaining about it, right? So you raise a point. The point is partially that we're very, very wealthy today, wealth of technology, a wealth of ease of use, a wealth of lack of disease, a wealth of longevity. But the other point to bring up is that happiness, especially when it comes to finances, is generally determined not in the absolute, but in the relative. And so we don't consider ourselves rich unless we have as much and maybe a little bit more than those around us. And so that's one of the things that you learn, as I mentioned before, like as you grow up middle class, you worked at Goldman Sachs. I grew up pretty middle class. I ended up working at Facebook. There are things that I never thought about flying private in my life until I worked at Facebook. And you're like, oh, that's what some of these people around me are doing. Oh, that's a thing. That's a thing maybe I should want. And your brain isn't even, you can't want something you're not aware of. And so as we climb up the social and the economic ladder, our brains find other things to want and make us unhappy when we realize that they're there and we don't have them. So 115 today, depending upon where you live, you could live like a king and you could be the richest person in the area, or you could be the poorest person. And unless you are highly, highly aware of that and remind yourself that shouldn't be determining your happiness, you're going to let that determine where you fall on that level of reasonable happiness.
So, follow-up question, because it's related to your answer. Envy. Does envy make us unhappy? Because,
oh my God, absolutely.
The Bible has a great line, and I'm not a evangelical person or anything like that, but I've read the Bible, of course, and I'm a practicing Catholic. You grew up Catholic. Seriously, people, funny, they say they grow up Catholic. Let me tell you something. Once you're a Catholic, Paul Olinger, you're always a Catholic. You can pretend otherwise.
It's baked in.
You can go Hindu. You can go all this shit. You're Catholic. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck in that web of that guilt cycle, and you're stuck with Jesus. You're just stuck with him, Paul. It's just the way it works, okay? So the But the point that I'm making is there's a line in the Bible, happy is the man who's happy with his own lot. He's sitting there with his own lot in life, satisfied. He's not peering over the gate. He's not peering over the hedge, looking at greener grass. Is that true, Paul, or what am I missing?
Well, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt said comparison is the thief of joy. Mm-hmm. And it's quoted so often because it's worth our contemplation, well said. That, in the commandments, do not covet. Do not covet is not just hey, you're going to commit a sin if you go and take your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's, belongings. It's also a recipe for happiness for yourself. Let it go, man. Don't covet. Coveting is no way to live your life. Being grateful for what you have is the path to happiness.
Well said. Okay, so you are an interesting guy because you go to Facebook. You're there at the right time. You're a brilliant guy. You're executing on behalf of Facebook. And as you write in the book, you've made yourself financially independent more than one time over from Facebook. God bless you. You made tons of money there. But then you make this dramatic decision to step away from corporate America, which is a brave thing to do. What are the lessons there? What was it? How did that decision go down? What were you thinking about? What were you thinking about as a kid? What were you thinking about at Facebook? And I see you as somebody that's returned to your inner kid. So tell me the thought process. Tell me the hero's journey of Paul Ollinger.
The truth of the matter is that I started doing comedy when I was in business school. I told jokes at a talent show. I went to business school because I wanted to make more money, and I ended up deciding that I wanted to be a stand-up comedian while at business school. But I had borrowed $80,000 in 1997 dollars, which would be what, 150, 160 today, something like that. So despite this dream that was born in me at that time, I had this obligation to pay back my loans. I was like, I got to get serious about adding value to the corporate world. I got into the digital media business, met some great people. I had a good run. And I'd always said, okay, if I have money in the bank and I'm still single, I'm going to go do stand-up comedy, which I did do for 2 years from 2005 to 2007 out in LA. Then I got engaged to my wife and was like, I need a real job. Right about that time, some friends of mine I had worked with at Yahoo called and said, come join us at this little startup called Facebook. And I was like, what the hell? Someday this company could be as big as MySpace. That's about how big my thinking was back then. And so I jumped on this roller coaster, this rocket ship. I had no idea it would be a $1.5 trillion market cap company some 17 years later. I surely wouldn't have left when I left in 2011 had I known that. But I just was at the point where I was like, I really was feeling like I needed to be doing something closer to what felt more authentic to me personally. And that eventually became writing and stand-up comedy. And that's what I've been doing every single day since late 2014.
Well, I mean, listen, it's ballsy if you just don't mind me saying so. Why are you laughing?
Well, it is. I mean, romanticism is, it's like great. And the thing I'm optimizing for is the minimization of regret on my deathbed. And the regret that I wanted to avoid, and we all have different kinds of regrets based on where we come from, who we are, all that kind of stuff. What's the regret you want to avoid? And the regret I wanted to avoid was not having the answer to the question, what would happen if I gave it my all? And when you quit your job and you chase your comedy dream or your dream to be a chef or an artist of any kind, that's all you get is the answer to the question, what would happen if I gave it my all? If you make some money, if you become famous, if people think you're swell, your book sells 100,000 or 1 million copies, well, that's just gravy. But that's not something you can count on. All you can count on is understanding that you have committed to the path, and what happens on that path is outside of your control, and you need to be okay with it. And that's the romantic journey. And the romantic journey is me after I hang up with you going to an open mic in front of 4 or 5 people somewhere just to run lines because I got to get ready for my headlining weekend in Sarasota next weekend. And it's not romantic. It's not sexy, but that's the gig. Mm. And that's what you're committing to. You're not committing to your Netflix special. That, maybe that happens. It probably doesn't, but maybe it happens. But you get to know, well, I gave it my all, and I don't have to sweat not knowing what would have happened.
I think I love it, and it's all the messaging that you're talking about is coming right from your book. But comedy is so hard. It is so hard because what's funny to you may not be funny to me, may not be funny to that audience, may not funny. There's certain things that are funny. Slapstick, you can always get somebody to laugh. You can go hard ethnic one way or another. You can David Chappelle something, you'll get people to laugh. Robin Williams had a great line about comedy. It was a great biography about him. After he passed away untimely, of course, he died from suicide related to depression. He said something really interesting about comedy. Tell the truth about life. People are not comfortable with the truth in life. Explain it to them and well deliver it. They'll start laughing. So I got a couple of topics I'm going to fire up here, and I want you to respond to them. Ready?
Yep.
Okay. Money. Can it buy happiness?
If you wanted to.
When you meet women, do you stand on your wallet, Paul?
The only women I meet are my wife and daughter. And so.
Did you stand on your wallet when you met your wife?
My wife could see in me an ambition. I didn't have a ton of money when I met her, but she could see in me an ambition that I didn't have to take what it was. But
all right, so
I didn't have this. I didn't have the strength to be poor.
All right, you're a growth stock. Your wife saw a growth stock.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And your daughter is probably like my daughter. She sees you as an oil well that it can never be not. Tapped,
but you know what? It's
never dry.
As long as you feel appreciated for being that oil well, then good enough.
By the way, please trust me. She's your daughter. She's going to take it, and you're going to not care. It's just unconditional. All right, let's go to marriage. We need some humor there, don't we?
Marriage, I think the reason why people talk about marriage isn't because of the stereotypes about, my wife or I'm a moron. It's because in marriage, we get to see the truth of ourselves through somebody else's eyes. And it's horrifying. It's just like I can't remember it might be in the book or might not be, but the price of being loved is being known. And being known is horrifying. To actually look at somebody who knows you as well as you know yourself, and that she sees you with all your flaws and your snoring and your disgusting habits and your insecurities, and knowing that, where that comes from, and you have to sit there and allow her to love you despite your imperfections. God, that's horrifying to me. And that's why marriage is hilarious. Because the fact that my wife loads the dishwasher like a maniac, to me, is really just my insecurity about not being able to control a chaotic world, and it drives me bananas.
Okay. All right. Keep going here. Parenting, and I'm going to say something else. Mother-in-laws.
Parenting is petrifying because the thing you love the most in the world, the thing that makes you the most vulnerable in the world, might not love you back with the same intensity until you're decades gone from this planet. In fact, probably won't.
Right. They won't get it until they have their own kids. Even.
That's exactly right. The reason my mom wanted me to get married was to understand how much I was loved. Not just because I was leading a dirty single life. Did
it work? You were, by the way, you were living a dirty single life.
I was living a very dirty.
We know that about you from your book. Yeah. That's when you were not reasonably happy. You were very fucking happy when you were reasonably.
It was fun. Now
you're reasonably happy.
It was fun. Yeah, it totally worked. That's the thing about having kids. When you have kids, you see how the world works, and you see, oh, I was loved and wanted. I mean, not for everybody, of course, but like for the very fortunate of us, I was loved and wanted and cherished more than I ever had any idea. And that's what parenthood's that's what parent does for you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go. No.
Yeah, well, that's and I think the mother-in-law thing.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to go. Go to the mother-in-law.
I mean, like the mother-in-law.
Your mother likes your wife?
My mom, my late mother, God bless her, was very excited that I married who I married because she's a good person who has a wonderful personality and is in it for the right reasons. My mother-in-law, also my late mother-in-law, God rest her soul, was the glue to our family. She was, nobody loves your kids more than your mother-in-law. And there's a lot. I have a whole bit about my father-in-law and about how he thinks I'm an effeminate waste of space. And he loves it because he's a cowboy and he's a real man. And I, sing show tunes and wear Lululemon. We went to Wicked 10 years ago and I cried in front of him. And that set me back, a decade of respect right there.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 55.
Are you man boob 55 or are you tight pec 55?
I got a little bit of man boobage, but I was just at the gym a couple hours ago,
and I'm bullshit on you. I had you very man boob. 55.
You are? I don't think.
I think you're man booby. I think
I'm not terrible. I'm not terrible. I got a little perkiness under the wrong sweater. The wrong sweater. It's not impressive.
I'm very impressed with my double D's at this point in my life. I was on a radio show and a guy said to me, you're railing on Trump, but you're like a D-list celebrity. You know what I said to the fucker? I said, hey, man, you got it wrong. I'm a double D-list celebrity. When I'm going in for breast reduction, I expect to be a B-lister when I come out. All right, you skipped the mother-in-law. I was impressed with that. It was a good move. Let's go to work.
Well, for most people don't get to work at the thing they really care about. They choose a career, or a career chooses them, and then they sort of get locked into a lifestyle, and it's hard to change once you get a ways down the path, and it's hard to see work as an opportunity. I tell you what happened to me when I quit my job at Facebook. I had a great 3 to 6 months, and then I realized one morning after dropping my kids off at school, when we lived in Atlanta still, I dropped them off at school, came home, and looked at my email, and it was like, there's no email. You have no messages. Nobody. I opened LinkedIn. It said nobody's looked at your profile for 90 days, and just for a second, I thought I was dead. And it's like, look, we resent the game. We hate the stress. We don't like our clients complaining and our colleagues bitching or asking for permission to do something they don't need. But what you realize when you stop working is that work provides you with a lot of stuff that we need as human beings. And that's belongingness and a place in the world.
No question.
And the self-esteem of solving client problems, of being a respected person who knows what he's talking about in an industry that's growing and exciting and interesting and changing all the time. And when you bail and you don't recommit yourself to something, you realize, oh my gosh, I was actually getting some amount of work besides a paycheck. But 90+% of us think about work pretty much only as a paycheck. And that's not giving work the credit it deserves.
Well said. All right, I'm down to the 5 words. We have 4 minutes. We're going to cover 5 words. They're culled from your book, 5 words. You give me a word back or a sentence. I'm going to say something. You think of what?
Okay.
So I say the word love. You think of what?
Family.
Okay. How about Facebook? I say the word Facebook.
Opportunity.
Okay. Marriage.
Important.
Comedy.
Bitch goddess.
Bitch goddess. Tell me, give me one more sentence.
So Emo Phillips calls comedy, he refers to it as the bitch goddess of comedy. It's the magical tincture that when it touches your lips is wonderful and transformative, and yet it's so elusive, and everybody wants a piece of it. And the supply of people who want a piece of it greatly exceeds the demand for our services. And so, except for a very few of us, it is a bitch goddess.
It's amazing. I see it as the antidote to life. We need it as a tonic for us.
It's magic. It really is magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, last word. And you get the last word. I say the word life. You say what?
I already said opportunity, right?
You said that for Facebook.
Oh man, I wish I would have kept it for life. I'm going to come back to love.
Love. All right. Well said. All right. The title of the book is Reasonably Happy. Paul has admitted, and hopefully his wife doesn't listen to our podcast, that he was very happy single, but he's reasonably happy now. God bless him. And the book is amazing. It's chock full of great stories and great philosophy. And it's funny, Paul. Okay. You have achieved the bitch goddess status in this book. And I'll just point out, I have the wonderful little stickers of your forehead there.
Oh, nice.
Okay?
Nice.
God bless you. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for joining us on Open Book.
Anthony, thank you so